Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fan fiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
Bet stood up and offered his hand, helping Bell to stand up too. He laughed again, grabbed his drink and pulled up a chair at Bell's table. "Mind if I join you?" "Go ahead." Bell growled, still very much in pain, clutching at his ruined ear. "Anyone got any potions on them?" Welf called out. The bartender threw him one and Welf adeptly caught it. "On the house," he said. "Thanks for not ruining the bar." Welf passed the potion to Bell, who drank half then poured the rest over his ear, wincing as it healed. "Thanks," he called out. The bartender just gave him a nod. Bet spoke up. "I'm impressed, Bell. You did well right up until the moment he grabbed your ear." Bell was still nursing his ear in his hands. Despite the potion, it still ached. "Yeah. I have been working on controlling my temper. I don't want to kill an innocent person by mistake. That's why I wear this mask. It blocks smell, so I won't lose it if someone's blood is spilled. But when he grabbed my ear like that, it was instinct. I couldn't help but bite him. Once I tasted it." Bell trailed off, rather angry at himself. Bet shook his head. "Not your fault, Bell. I mean, come on, what kind of idiot would grab a were-rabbit's ears? Guy must have a death wish or something. Like I told you before, Bell, you already have remarkable control. Well, unless it's around blood or Aiz," Bet said, trying to lighten the mood and get the topic away from Bell's bloodlust. "Huh? Did I do something to Aiz?" Bet just grinned at him. "You don't remember, do you? After the Goliath fight you pounced on Aiz." "I did what?" Bet's grin got even bigger. "You were nuzzling her, Bell. If you hadn't passed out with a mind down, who knows, we might very well have had a pregnant Aiz right now." Bell choked on his meat, instantly going a deep shade of red. Bet slapped him on the back and laughed his ass off. Bell pulled at his collar. The rented tuxedo he was wearing was uncomfortable. The stiff collar of the shirt rubbed raw against his neck. He wasn't enjoying Apollo's party so far. It was pretty boring to keep saying hello to gods and goddesses he didn't know as he mingled with Hestia. It had been nice to see Mayak though, at least that was someone he knew, and with Naza being there, he at least had someone to talk to. Later Makoto had joined them with Takamikazuchi, and finally Hermes had wandered over and was teasing the girls about their appearance. Suddenly a wave of sound from the crowd, drowning them all out. "Would you look at that? The big cheese has arrived." Hermes sounded surprised as he looked in the same direction as the crowd did. Bell looked to see a giant Boaz that had been stuffed into an expensive, but still ill-fitting suit. Next to the giant warrior stood a silver-haired goddess. "Who's that?" Bell asked Hermes. "That, Bell, is Lady Freya. I'm sure you've come across the name Freya Familia before?" Hermes was expecting Bell's normal reaction, to laugh and smile due to embarrassment of not knowing who she was. However, Bell's face just went dark. Hermes had never seen him without a cheerful smile before, and the look on Bell's face was shocking. Bell was staring at Freya with anger. Hermes was expecting him to be charmed by her beauty and to be fawning over her like every other man in the room was, but this was not the case. Frowning himself, Hermes wondered what this was all about. Even without using her charm, Bell should be an embarrassed mess right now, drooling over her beauty. After a moment Bell looked away, as if looking at the goddess was the last thing he wanted to do. Freya turned to look directly at Bell. She wasn't surprised. Bell wasn't looking at her with deep love like he should be. He wasn't even looking at her at all. How could this be? She was hoping to charm him away from Hestia that evening, but he hadn't been charmed at all. She felt deep regret for her past actions. She had hoped her charm would be able to smother the black flame she had created in his heart, but it seemed to have no effect at all. Her eyes glowed purple for a moment. Even though Bell wasn't looking at her, she pushed the full force of her charm onto him. Bell's expression changed at that moment, and with a smile, he started walking in her direction. Freya gave a small smile of her own. He hadn't resisted her charm at all, and he was coming right to her. Perfect. Smiling gently, she enjoyed watching him approach, but after a moment she noticed something. Bell wasn't looking at her, he was looking over her shoulder. Then, he walked right past her as if she didn't matter. In fact, he'd sped up to a slow jog. Loki and Aiz had just entered the room, and Bell had noticed straight away. Seeing Aiz is what had caused him to smile, and he had started walking over to her. He gave her a good look as he approached. She was stunning. Dressed in a green backless dress with white gloves, she was the definition of a woman at her peak of beauty. To Bell, she overwhelmed all the other beauties in the room. He only had eyes for her. Aiz began looking for Bell as soon as she had stepped into the room. She wasn't sure if he would be here tonight, but all the gods had been invited, so if Hestia were here, Bell had to be. Almost straight away she had noticed Bell as he began to walk over to her, a big smile on his face. She returned the smile and walked as quickly as she could in her high heels. Oh, how she hated those shoes, but Loki had insisted, telling her that boots didn't look right in a dress. Aiz hadn't cared due to the unpractical nature of the shoes, but Loki had insisted she wear them. Cursing the shoes that she wasn't used to walking in, she almost tripped several times as she tried to get to Bell as fast as she could. Bell broke into a full run as he saw her start to walk to him. Suddenly the couple embraced in the middle of the dance floor, shocking most of the people in the room. Well, those that were not currently staring at Freya. Freya was watching the boy in shock. What had happened? How had her charm failed? Aiz and Bell hugged warmly, both saying the same thing as they embraced. I missed you. They whispered into each other's ears, causing both to giggle at saying the same thing. Bell pulled back and looked into her eyes. He was about to say how good it was to see her, but didn't get a chance to open his mouth. Aiz leaned forward, then gently rubbed her cheek against his, like he would do when he nuzzled her in rabbit form. Going back and forth, she nuzzled each cheek over and over, making Bell giggle a bit. He didn't realize exactly what she was trying to tell him with this gesture, but a while later he did figure it out. This was Aiz's way of showing more than just affection for him. Aiz was trying to say to Bell that he was hers, he belonged to her. She was copying the same scent-marking behavior as if to tell him that she accepted his feelings and felt the same way about him. Aiz had thought long and hard about Bell in the few weeks since they had last seen each other. She had missed him terribly and had behaved like a lovesick puppy at home. It had taken a while, but Riveria eventually grew tired of Aiz's behavior and sat her down for a talk. She had finally realized that she did love him, and this was her way of showing it. Loki gave an exasperated sigh and decided to take out her ire on Hestia. Marching over, she decided to give the little lowly goddess a piece of her mind. This is all your fault, itty bitty. If you hadn't taken that damn rabbit into your familia, none of this would be happening. Hestia just sighed, looking at the couple who were lost in a bubble of their own, totally oblivious to the gods and goddesses who were staring at them right now. Shut up, ironing board. I'm not happy about it either, but... She trailed off for a second, looking at the pair again. Look at them. Have you ever seen a couple in love like that? Yes, it's quite perplexing. A new voice spoke. Hestia and Loki both turned to find Freya behind them. Ugh. Freya. What do you want? Hestia frowned at Freya. Now Hestia, no need to be rude. Freya smiled elegantly. I'm just curious about your child, that's all. He must be quite the charmer to have stolen the sword princess's heart. Hestia just gave a humph in response, folding her arms and looking away from Freya in irritation. You stay away from my Bell. I'm warning you, Freya, you don't want to get involved with him. Oh ho, Hestia. Is that a threat I hear? And what does the tiny goddess think she can do about me? Hestia gave a wicked little grin. Oh, it's not a threat. I wouldn't do anything to you, dear Freya. Hestia emphasized the dear with sarcasm. It's a warning. Bell is not a man you should be messing with. And why is that, dear Hestia? Freya also emphasized the dear with bitter sarcasm, although she was actually quite fond of Hestia being one of the few people who actually spoke their mind around the goddess. He hates you, Freya. More than you could possibly know. Freya laughed out loud at that remark. He hates me? Oh dear, what did I do to the poor child? Tell me. Hestia began with a dark look on her face. Tell me, how old do you think Bell is? Freya squinted for a moment, looking at the boy. He looks to be around 15, I would guess. It can be hard to tell when they are growing. But Hestia never had a chance to respond. Bell had mentioned to Aiz that they were neglecting their goddesses, so they had broken their embrace and were walking over to the group hand in hand. Bell gave them all a deep bow once they had approached. Good evening, Lady Loki. Then through gritted teeth, while still bowing, good evening, Lady Freya. Freya watched as the black flames in Bell's soul raged at her. She became more heartbroken than ever. The pain of the mistake of her past actions was confirmed now. Still, she had to maintain the act. Bell could not be allowed to know that Seer and she were the same person. Oh, how charming! Freya exclaimed, a hand on her cheek. Bell stood up and she reached for his face, gently brushing his cheek. Will you give me sweet dreams tonight? She asked him, looking into his eyes, her charm unleashed, her own eyes glowing purple. Bell just frowned at her. No, then he coldly turned away back to Loki and Hestia. Lady Loki, I must thank you and your familia for helping my friends and I on the 18th floor. If Loki familia hadn't been there, I don't know if we would have survived. We owe you our lives. Loki just snorted. Right place, right time, you got lucky, rabbit man. She then poked him in the chest. Look after my Ace-tan, will ya? Be a good rabbit and make her happy. Bell smiled. From what Aiz had told him about Loki, he was rather surprised that she wasn't tearing into him right now. Apparently Loki was very possessive about Aiz and had often declared that Aiz was hers and no man could ever claim her. That slight approval from Loki had caused Bell's heart to soar. Freya's smile never wavered during her first encounter with Bell as her goddess self. She had learnt all she needed to know during her conversations with him as Seer. But to have it confirmed like that was devastating to her. Her heart broke a little more and she cursed herself over and over. She would never have what she wanted, her charm had failed. What perhaps hurt her the most wasn't the fact that she would never have him as her soulmate, it was the fact she could not use her charm to soothe the flames of hatred that burned within him. His soul would remain tainted and there was nothing she could do about it. She had never felt so powerless. It wasn't a feeling she welcomed. She was a goddess after all. She had grieved the death of past familia members, she understood pain, but this was a pain she had never experienced before and she did not like it one bit. At that moment a band stuck up a waltz and various couples began to appear on the dance floor. Bell, despite beginning to realize that Aiz felt the same way, was still nervous when he went to ask her to dance. However, there was no way he couldn't ask her. He'd been hoping she would be here and they would get to dance together as soon as Hestia had told him they would be going to Apollo's party. He reached out a hand to Aiz. Would. He stammered for a moment. He coughed and swallowed a gulp before gathering his nerves. Would you like to dance, Aiz? She gave him a broad happy smile and took his hand. Gladly. Bell led her out to the dance floor, but hesitated. His face flushed with embarrassment. He didn't know how to dance and now he was standing in the middle of the dance floor, with the women he loved so much. Utter panic set in. What would he do? Aiz, do you know how to dance? Aiz shook her head. She had never danced before. However, Mayak bumped into him from behind, getting his attention. Giving Bell a quick grin as he turned to look, Mayak knelt down and took Naza's hand in his own. May I have the pleasure of this dance, my lady? He gently asked Naza, causing her to blush. She had been waiting for that all evening, though she was disappointed that Mayak had asked her to help Bell. she still wanted to dance and Bell was her friend. She was happy to help him if she could. My pleasure, she replied, accepting Mayaka's hand. She winked at Bell and Aiz, who were both staring at the couple. Watch, she mouthed the word without saying it. Bell and Aiz watched as Mayak put a hand around Naza's waist and took her other hand with his. Bell watched for a few moments, noticing the foot movements and how Mayak led the dance and Naza followed. The dance was a few simple steps repeated back and forth, and both of the couple quickly understood what to do. Bell gave a slight cough and turned back to Aiz. Copying Mayak, he placed his hand on Aiz's waist and took her other hand in his. She placed her spare hand on his shoulder, the same as Naza had done with Mayak. Mayak and Naza twirled beside them, happy smiles on their faces. Without looking away from Mayak, Naza suddenly said, "Look at each other's eyes, not your feet," and then the couple waltzed away. Bell took the first step backwards, Aiz hesitating slightly before moving her own foot. Then, gazing at each other, they began to dance. It was a little awkward at first, but they quickly found their rhythm to the music and each other. Aiz thought it was a lot like training together, anticipate each other's movement and respond. She giggled for a second and smiled. Something funny? Bell asked her. It's like when we trained. Moving together like this. I like it. Bell smiled and laughed. On impulse, he tried to move others had been doing. He pulled back from Aiz, removing his hand from her waist, and brought his other hand up high, pulling hers with it. Aiz knew exactly what he was doing and twirled under her own arm before embracing him in the dance again. She giggled again and the two lost themselves to the music in each other's eyes. Bell didn't know how long they danced that evening. At the time it felt like forever, and he didn't want it to ever end. Afterwards it felt like a few fleeting moments, something he would remember forever. As they danced, Bell was fighting a powerful urge to kiss Aiz, which was getting stronger and stronger every moment. However, he decided that it wasn't right for their first kiss to be so public. He would wait until later, hopefully having a chance to talk to Aiz on the balcony outside. Suddenly the music stopped and the room went dark for a moment, only for Aiz and Bell to be illuminated by a spotlight. They stopped dancing, but stood there holding each other, wondering what was going on. Another spotlight appeared, illuminating a figure standing at the top of some stairs that led down into the ballroom. Bell recognized Apollo, who Hermes had pointed out to him earlier in the evening. "Guests, are you enjoying the celebration?" Apollo boomed with a large voice. He began walking down the steps towards Aiz and Bell, the spotlight keeping pace with him as he walked. Hestia suddenly appeared next to Bell and grabbed him. He hadn't seen her sneak through the darkness. She was shaking a little and Bell wondered what she was scared about. Loki did the same, appearing next to Aiz and grabbing hold of her too. Both gods protecting their precious children. Much time has passed, but... Hestia. It appears my children have caused you some trouble. Hestia's eyes narrowed. What was Apollo up to? Yes, I hear that they did. My precious child was critically injured by your boy. I demand compensation. It was true. Bell had shattered the bones in Hyacinthus's arm. It couldn't be denied. However. Ha! Laughable. Your own child brought it upon himself. Your familia trying to bully my Bell and then being stupid enough to grab a were-rabbit's ears? Pull the other one, Apollo, it's got bells on it. She suddenly looked at Bell. No offense. Bell shook his head. His name was no reason to take offense at the common phrase. Still, my child was severely harmed by your beast Hestia. Do you deny that he is not fit for public society? That he, like all the were-rabbits, cannot control himself? Bell has had enough, though. This evening has been a roller coaster for his emotions, and he's had enough at this point. First he had to deal with seeing Freya for the first time, which had brought back, well, not memories, he didn't have those, but the grief he felt for his murdered family. The fact that the person responsible was standing right in front of him and he could do nothing about it, was agonizing. But then Aiz had shown up and nuzzled him, his heart melting in that moment of affection, taking him from a peak of anger to one of uttermost pleasure and happiness. He had stayed on that high all the way through the evening as he danced with Aiz, both of them lost in each other, oblivious to the world around them. He had been really looking forward to a private moment with her later, but that was ruined now. And finally Apollo was trying. Well, something. Bell didn't think he had done anything wrong. He was attacked, he defended himself, that was all. Your child attacked me first. I acted in self-defense, he said in a blank monotone voice. Almost dispassionate. Apollo blinked for a second, not expecting a child to speak to him in such a manner. Enough, he shouted. Hestia, one of my beloved followers, was badly wounded. I cannot accept this lying down. The reputation of my familia is on the line. Hestia, will you not take responsibility for his actions? Enough already. Like hell I'll accept that. Hestia screamed back at him. You leave me no choice. Hestia, I declare a war game. Should my side prevail, I demand you surrender the boy Bell Cranel to me. Hestia gasped. For Bell, this was the final straw. Bring it, he replied coldly. Hyacinthus is your captain, correct? If he's the best you have. Bell gave Apollo a wicked grin as he stepped forward and changed into his true form. Then I'll personally send the rest of your familia and you back to Tenkai. Ignoring the shocked response of the room, Bell took Hestia's hand and left. Curse of the War Rabbit Chapter 6. Otter didn't know what to do. Freya had been nothing but despair since Apollo's party. She wallowed in a misery that Otter had never seen before, and he felt lost. Lost because there was nothing he could do to help his lady. All he could do was watch, and it was breaking his heart. She sat every day for the next 2 weeks and watched Bell train with Aiz and Tiona on the city walls. Her tears flowed constantly. Otter couldn't understand. As she watched him train, she would cheer him on, but then she would weep even harder. Freya felt torn in two as she watched Bell train. When he was with Aiz, his dark flame settled and was barely visible in his soul. The same was true for Aiz. Her own dark flame was greatly diminished whenever she was with Bell. Both of their souls shined whenever they were together. It brought joy to Freya's heart as she saw his happiness, and there was nothing she wanted more than to see Bell be happy. But sit and watch was all she could do. She wanted to rush to him, to take him in her arms and ease his pain, but she knew she couldn't. She was the source of the pain that tormented his soul. She desperately wanted to explain it all to him. That it had been a mistake. She hadn't even known who Bell's parents were. Despite being high level, they were not Zeus Familia executives, and neither had a soul that caught her eye. Until she heard from Bell what happened. She hadn't even known that her familia had encountered the Cranel family in the past. She cursed her previous self as her despair dragged her down into a pit of self-loathing. She swore to herself that she would do everything she could to ease his pain. She had enjoyed pushing him before the truth had come out, watching him grow as he overcame every challenge she had thrown at him. She knew that he would never love her back, no matter what she did. But that didn't mean she could not watch from afar. It didn't mean she couldn't watch over him, encourage him silently, protect him without him knowing. She wanted to make it all up to him. Despite knowing that it wasn't possible, she would do her best. She would continue to push him, continue to watch him, and continue to love him. And every moment she did, she would keep hating herself. Bell's training on the walls with Aiz and Tiona had gone particularly well over the last 2 weeks. He fought hard, gaining more strength every day. Tiona was surprised at just how possessive of Bell Aiz was. No matter how many times she asked, Aiz wouldn't let Tiona give him a lap pillow or stroke his ears. Bell's stats rose fast as he pushed himself, fighting against the 2 level 6 opponents. By the end of the 2 weeks he had maxed out his level 2 stats and just needed the right push to get to level 3. Aiz and Tiona were both surprised at how strong he was getting, especially when he was in his rabbit form. The girls found they had to get serious when Bell was in his rabbit body. He fought more like a mid-level 5 and was getting more and more comfortable with fighting in that style every day as he began to understand more and more how to move and fight with his backwards legs and teeth and claws. Tiona didn't say it, but it often felt to her that she was fighting a monster. instead of a man. Both the city and the gods were in uproar as they watched the events of the wargame unfold through the magic mirrors that had opened in every bar and cafe across the city. No one had expected Hestia Familia to go on the attack straight away. The doubt had appeared on Apollo's face as soon as he saw Ryu swing the first magic sword. He realized his hubris at that moment. His sheer arrogance had made him overconfident. As the walls of the castle crumbled under the fire and lightning of the Kratzo magic weapons, he began to panic. He might have well over 100 adventures in his familia, but Ryu had just blown half of them away. His precious children lay injured and broken all over the battlefield as Ryu fought the few remaining survivors. Traitor! He screamed at the magic mirror as Lily, disguised as Luan, pulled the lever to open the gate. Well done, Lily! Bell said with some pride to his prom friend as he and Welf stepped through the gate and entered the castle, joining the battle for the first time. I'll go and cause some more chaos, Lily said with a smirk, before turning and running back into the castle. Ready for this? Bell asked, turning to his smith friend. Let's do this, Welf cried with a grin as he pulled his great sword from his back. Bell looked up into the sky. He could feel the eyes of the gods and city on him, and despite there being nothing to look at, he knew the exact position he was being observed from via the magic mirror. Once he was sure all eyes were on him, he drew his two knives, striking a battle pose, and changed. The city and the gods watched as black smoke whirled around him, and he revealed himself to the public for the first time. The rumors are true, Ibri shouted into his microphone. Belcranel is the last of the war rabbits. I would never have thought I would see a sight like this in my lifetime. Ganesha, what do you think? Ganesha stood dumbstruck for a moment before quietly saying, I am Ganesha, his voice filled with awe. Across the city, people watched, mouths agape as they saw Bell change. The rumors about him and about the war rabbit in general had circulated for months now, but nothing lived up to seeing it for real. Bell terrified many of them, others looked on in curiosity, wondering just exactly what the giant rabbit man would do. Mord sat back in his chair, his face had gone white. Bell had been the war rabbit all this time? Why hadn't he used his skills when he abducted his goddess in the dungeon? As Mord looked and saw Bell's massive saber fangs, he began to realize just how lucky he had been that day. Lucky that Bell had been merciful and not inflicted a terrible vengeance on him. Like many in the city, Mord was well aware of the history of the war rabbit race, especially their pronounced anger and bloodlust. He counted his blessing in that moment, knowing full well it was only Bell's kind demeanor that saved his life that day. If he had made Bell truly angry, he wouldn't be sitting there right at this moment. He had already started to respect the young man after the fight, but now, that respect was backed up with a healthy dose of fear. Bell slipped his mask over his nose. Blood would be spilt today, that he knew for sure. He was going to do his best to avoid it. He didn't want to kill anyone, this was just a war game after all. But injury would be inflicted and blood would spill. He didn't want a rampage, but felt he needed the strength of his rabbit form in order to win. They were just 5 of them fighting against 100 adventurers. He needed all the help he could get to have a hope of winning. The plan had worked so far though. Ryu had already taken out almost half of the troops and Makoto was holding another 10. Stuck to the ground with her gravity magic. Welf and Bell were still outnumbered though, they had a tough fight coming and they knew it. He gave Welf a nod and they both charged into the castle. I'll take the mages, Welf shouted as they exited the tower and stepped onto the bridge that crossed over to only entrance of the main keep. Bell took a quick look around, smiling at the destruction Ryu had wrought to the walls and the purple glow showing that Makoto was keeping their backs clear. I'll take out the archers, Bell confirmed as he started running across the bridge. Burn out. Illegal work. Will-o-wisp. Welf chanted and then grinned as the line of mages standing on the opposite end of the bridge exploded one by one as their magic failed them with an ignis fatuus. People screamed and many panicked, they didn't know how, but Hestia Familia had just taken out all of their mages in one fell swoop. Daphne cursed as Bell slipped by her, ignoring her, intent on getting to the throne room as quickly and with as little bloodshed as possible. "Where do you think you're going, sister?" Welf said with a grin as Daphne was about to turn and chase Belle. "Let's do this like adventurers," he said with a grin as he drew his sword and faced her. "Don't let him get away," Daphne shouted to the few remaining archers who stood before Belle in the entrance. One of the calmer and more disciplined members of Apollo Familia raised his bow, took a moment to aim and loosed an arrow. Time seemed to slow down for many as the magic window focused on the arc of the arrow heading towards Belle. Many held their breath without knowing it. Surely the battle would not end this simply with an arrow in the back, would it? The arrow glided through the air, but was slightly off target. With a whistle, it penetrated Belle's left ear. "Arg!" Belle screamed at the top of his voice. The pain was unbearable. On reflex, he reached up and tore the arrow from his ear, causing him to scream again. "Arg!" The pain was too much, his instincts overrode his humanity and the rabbit rage descended. He stood there for a moment, breathing hard as his view of the world changed. He tensed his legs, crouching down, and then sprang, leaping at the nearest archer, tearing into the man with his claws and teeth. "No!" Aiz yelled at the magic mirror. "Oh no, no, this can't be happening." She instantly began to panic. She knew exactly what was coming next. Belle was going to kill every member of Apollo Familia unless someone stopped him, but no one there was strong enough. It was going to be an utter bloodbath, a total massacre. "Aiz?" Tiona asked with some concern in her voice. She didn't know what to say though. Aiz looked horrified. "I have to stop him, I'm the only one that can do it," the blonde princess said as she stood and ran to the window, flinging it open. "Tempest!" she shouted and leapt. "No!" Cassandra screamed. She was sitting at the base of the throne that Hyacinthos sat upon. "My dream! It changed!" She gasped in horror as her vision played back to her again, but this time it was so much worse. A wounded rabbit leaps over a blood moon and devours the sun. Blood rains from the sky and washes away a castle. Death, nothing but death. She screamed hysterically. She jumped up and grabbed Hyacinthos by both arms. "You have to leave. He's coming and he will kill us all. Get off me." Hyacinthos shoved the prophet away, disgusted at her poor attempt to convince him to run. "All of you," he said to the team of adventurers he had gathered. "Stand firm. When Cranel gets here, deal with him, but don't kill him. I want to finish him myself." Hyacinthos didn't care for Apollo's love for Belle. He had no intention of allowing Belle to be taken as part of his familia. He hated the rabbit especially for the pain he had suffered when Belle bit his arm. He wanted his revenge. "No!" Cassandra screamed. "You have to run. He's coming. He's coming and he will kill us all." "Shit!" Welf cried and leapt back from Daphne. "Oh fuck no!" He shouted again as he saw the red mist descend in Belle's eyes, and he knew exactly what was coming next. "Daphne! It's over. You have to run, get your people out of here, he will kill everyone." "What?" Daphne gave Welf a confused look until she heard a horrific scream behind her. She turned and saw Belle as he ripped the throat out of one of her familia members and gorged on the freely flowing blood. "But," she said, stunned for a moment. "Run, you idiot!" Welf screamed in her face and tried to shove her along the bridge away from the rampaging rabbit who had already leapt onto his second victim and was shredding them apart with his claws. "Belle!" he shouted, trying to get the young man's attention, hoping he could at least find a spark of humanity left in him. "WELF!" Belle roared back at him and leapt again, swiping a kick at an archer, slicing their stomach clean open. Welf tried not to retch as he saw the man's entrails and organs spill on the floor. Welf ran up to him. He hadn't seen Belle in a rampage yet, only that brief moment in the pub before Bet put him down. But he couldn't let his friend down. Despite the potential risk to himself, he had to do his best to mitigate Bell's anger. "Bell! This way!" he called, trying to guide Bell into the tower and away from the majority of Apollo Familia. He estimated only 10 or 20 remained in the tower, with the rest current spread around the castle, mostly injured, down and out of the fight but still alive. He knew full well, though, Bell would instinctively go for the nearest target. If he didn't guide him inside and give Daphne a chance to get everyone evacuated, Bell would systematically slaughter each and every member, regardless if they were down and injured or not. There was no room for mercy during a rabbit rage. "Right!" Bell roared at him. "Oh, Bell!" Hestia wanted to look away from the horror depicted in front of her, but she couldn't tear her eyes from the magic mirror. She wanted to be sick. She knew, deep down, what Bell could be like. He had been so scared of himself when she first met him. Now she understood why. Bell hadn't exaggerated when he spoke of the bandits he killed, but she didn't know the brutality of it. The reality of it hit her at that moment. This was why war rabbits were hunted to extinction. A war rabbit when fallen to bloodlust was far scarier than any monster in the dungeon. She watched as he ripped and tore his victims to pieces. She watched as he became drenched in blood. She finally turned away in horror as she saw the delight in Bell's eyes as he caught one of his victims and like a vampire gorged himself on their blood. "Hestia!" Apollo called out, his voice shaking with fear and anger. "We surrender! Please! He'll do anything, you have to stop him. He's killing my children, my precious children." "Apollo!" Hestia didn't know what to say. There was nothing she could do. She had no divine power she could use to stop her child on his rampage. "This is your own fault, Apollo," Hermes began to say, but was interrupted by Freya, who was laughing hysterically. "Ah ha ha." She laughed with glee at the slaughter that was unfolding on the screen in front of her. "He's so beautiful. So powerful. What a delightful child you have, Hestia." Many forgot that Freya wasn't just a goddess of beauty and fertility, she was a goddess of war. To her there was nothing more delightful than the battlefield, nothing more beautiful than the blood and violence she was now watching. Bell's rampage made her spine tingle with pleasure. Seeing him in action, in his true form and fighting with such burning passion for blood overwhelmed her. Even as she cackled with glee, she cursed herself internally once again. There he was, her otter, her chosen one, her soulmate in all his glory, and to her, he was more beautiful than ever. She watched as his soul burned, not with the black flame that she caused but with the passion for battle and blood. The black flame was still present, but was only a flicker right now. Bell didn't hate the people he was killing at that moment, he was simply acting on his race's instinct, so the black flame only burned dimly at the base of his soul. All over the city, people turned away from the magic mirrors, unable to keep witnessing the utter horror that was being displayed. Bell was utterly terrifying. He showed no mercy to his victims, each one was shredded to bits by his claws and teeth, blood was flying everywhere, coating the walls and floor of the castle as he moved from victim to victim. Mord looked on in horror and counted his blessings once again. He thought he had understood how lucky he was when he saw Bell first change. Now he really understood. During their fight, Bell had been going easy on him. If he made Bell truly angry, he would have suffered the same fate. He turned his face away from the screen and prayed for Apollo Familia's survival. "Oh my Loki," Finn said under his breath as he watched. "I don't think I can watch this." Riveria turned her head away from the screen. Lafia shuddered as she watched the rabbit man disembowel another Apollo Familia adventurer. "I'm gonna be sick." She covered her mouth and ran from the room. "Yeah. Go Argonaut Kun. Kill them all." Tiona shouted as she leapt up. Tiona was loving every minute of this, her Amazon instincts kicking in hard. Bet stood leant against the wall, his hands in his pockets, but he stared at the screen with a serious expression on his face. "Whatever you do, don't fuck with Bell Crannel," he said quietly as he watched. More. Bell instincts screamed at him as he drank the blood of his first victim. It was the archer who had shot his ear. The moment he had pulled the arrow out, the pain took over and the redness descended. As he ripped the man's throat out, the hot blood had splashed into his mouth and the bloodlust had awoken in him. More blood. Apart from biting hyacinthos, Bell hadn't tasted blood since the bandits he killed on his journey to Orario. He'd been so careful too, tried so hard to avoid his bloodlust during the few full moons that had passed since his arrival to the city. But it was too late now, the desire overwhelmed his humanity and nothing would hold him back now. To his rabid mind, Apollo Familia had been hunting him and he couldn't allow any of them to survive. Nothing tasted as good as blood did to him at that moment. It wasn't a craving that could be satiated by the dungeon. Monster blood was disgusting, he hated it. But the blood of adventurers tasted like the finest wine to him. He craved it, wanted to bath himself in it. The hotness of it, the smell of iron in the air, all of it drove him further and further into his rabid rage. He heard Welf shout his name and looked up with his bloodshot eyes to see his friend and now familiar member looking at him in horror. WELF. He roared, acknowledging his partner on the battlefield. Bell, this way. He looked, Welf was pointing inside the castle. He vaguely remembered that his goal was the throne room, that Hyacinthos was there. His eyes shined as he realized that Welf was trying to help him, guide him to the man that had caused this situation in the first place. He wasn't here just to slaughter, much as he was enjoying himself, he was here to win a wargame too. His humanity might be gone, but his rationality wasn't. He followed Welf as he ran into the castle. To say Aiz was running would not describe what the girl was actually doing. She was using her tempest to her utmost, taking great leaps with every step trying to get to the castle as quickly as she could. The castle wasn't far outside Orario, only 20 minutes on foot at a walking pace. Aiz would be there in 5. She desperately hoped she would make it on time. She had to calm him, she had to stop him. She was painfully aware of the damage Bell was doing to himself at this moment. People would never look at him the same again. She had to stop him before it got any worse, she had to limit the number of people he killed. He wouldn't be blamed for the deaths, she knew that. It was a war game, death happened when two familias fought like this, it was an accepted part of two gods having a dispute. But that wasn't the damage he was doing. How would the people of the city see him now? Now that they knew just how terrifying he could be? She had to stop him before he went too far. Cassandra ran, she ran as fast as she could, she had to get out of there. She had to get away, death was coming, blood and terror were approaching. Panic overwhelmed her as she fled, she tripped over her feet as she ran, utterly terrified of the vision she saw the moment Bell had been struck by the arrow. She knew they were going to lose before that moment from her earlier vision, but the change to it had been too much. She didn't want to die. As she turned the corner, trying to reach the bridge to escape, she looked up and stared straight into Bell's bloodshot eyes. "No!" She screamed and dropped to her knees, frozen in fear. "Cassandra! Run!" Welf shouted at her, but the girl just sat there on her knees, unable to move, staring at the blood-covered monster of a man who was standing in front of her. "Shit! Bell!" Welf cried out. But Bell stopped for a moment, tilting his head and sniffing the air. He knew this girl's scent, he had met her before. A brief flashback played through his mind, the moment she had introduced herself at the guild. She had been so shy, he remembered, and so apologetic. It was enough for him to remember her scent, and that meant she was someone he knew. "Cassandra!" He roared and leapt over the girl, leaving her behind. "Damn, you got lucky!" Welf shouted as he ran by the girl who was now lying on the floor and trembling. "Which way's the throne room?" Welf asked her, but the girl just hugged herself and sobbed. "Shit!" Welf cursed and chased after the killer rabbit. Dong! The grand bell began to toll as Bell charged his Argonaut skill as he ran to the throne room. "Wrong floor, Bell, we need to go up." Welf shouted at him. "Right." Bell roared back and pointed his hand up towards the ceiling. Gah! Welf cried as he jumped back into the corridor and out of the room. He knew full well how powerful Argonaut could be and didn't feel like getting crushed by a failing ceiling at that moment. Firebolt! Bell roared. Hyacinthos cried out as he pulled himself from the rubble that was all that was left of the main keep of the castle. He wasn't quite sure what had happened. He had been sitting in the throne room, listening to the sounds of battle get closer and closer. A bell had rung, which hadn't made any sense, then the floor had erupted and all he could feel was a sensation of falling. He struggled to stand, not being able to see due to the dust and smoke that was swirling in the air at that moment. Ag! He exclaimed as he stood and felt the pain from the bruises inflicted by his fall. He looked around, but couldn't see anything but randomly piled stone. Everyone else was gone. He clutched at his elbow that hurt painfully from the fall. As the dust began to clear, he saw a silhouette that was walking slowly towards him. It took him a moment before he recognized the shape of the ears in the shadow. Bell was coming for him. As the dust cleared, he began to see Bell for the first time that day, and the vision he saw terrified him. Bell was covered in blood from head to toe. A deep growl emanated from his throat as he approached the Apollo Familia's captain. No, Hyacinthos, run! Please! Apollo shouted at the screen. Please run! I don't want you to die, my beloved. Apollo was in an appalling state. He had screamed every time he felt one of his children die. It certainly hadn't helped that Freya had laughed with joy every time that he did. Despite being a god, he had lost all his dignity as he cried and wailed watching the slaughter of his familia. In desperation, Hyacinthos started chanting, his voice wavering and shaking as he did. My name is love, PP precious child of light. Firebolt! Bell didn't give him a chance. The moment he heard the chant begin, he retaliated. As the firebolt rushed towards the Apollo captain, it cleared the air of smoke and dust, and finally the destruction of the tower was revealed to Hyacinthos and the rest of Orario. Mord was shaking in fear now. Bell had destroyed the entire castle with one attack. Those who hadn't turned away due to Bell's sickening display of slaughter understood just how powerful the young man was now. If they were terrified of him before, there were no words to describe just how scared the city was of the rabbit man now. Hyacinthos drew his sword and stood ready to defend himself on shaky feet. He wanted to run, he so wanted to run, but he couldn't. He was the Familia captain. Running would be admitting defeat. He would never be able to look Apollo in the eye if he ran. Scared as he was of the blood-soaked rabbit that was walking slowly towards him, he still had his pride. He would go down fighting if he could. With a scream he ran at Bell, raising his sword, hoping to get a blow in. But he didn't get a chance. Bell had increased his stats with his training with Aiz and Tiona, and like they had estimated, he was around mid-level 5 when in rabbit form. Hyacinthos didn't stand a chance. Bell grabbed his sword out of the air, wrenching it away and throwing it to the ground. He grabbed Hyacinthos by his shirt and with one hand lifted him up off of the ground. His bloodshot red eyes stared into Hyacinthos's blue ones. Stop! Hyacinthos tried to shout, but Bell wasn't going to stop. He lifted his other hand, extending a claw, and dug it into the side of Hyacinthos's neck, drawing a line down the jugular vein, splitting it open. A fountain of blood shot into the air and rained down over the pair. Bell closed his eyes and tilted his head back, enjoying the sensation of blood raining down on his face. He opened his mouth and let as much blood as he could fall onto his tongue. It didn't take long. Hyacinthos lost pint after pint of blood with each pump of his heart. Soon the pressure dropped and the man's heart failed. Dropping his victim, he started looking around for the next threat, sniffing the air. He could tell that there were at least 50 people around him still alive. He smiled to himself, 50 more chances to taste blood again. His mouth watered in anticipation. He turned towards the nearest scent and was about to leap when he heard a shout from above him. Bell! Aiz appeared out of nowhere, dropping out of the sky, covered in her wind. Aiz! He roared back with joy. Even in his bloodlust, being around Aiz made him happy. She landed just in front of him and grabbed his arm. Bell! Enough! It's time to stop. She cried at him, her face was desperate, he'd never seen her panic like this before. Can't, he roared as he turned back to his previous target and tried to step in their direction. Bell. She grabbed him in a hug and held him, stopping him from moving. Bell. Stop. Listen to me. She cried desperately into his ear. Can't. He roared again. Smell them. Still alive. His eyes darted wildly around as he began to spot more and more injured Apollo adventurers lying across the battlefield. Bell. Look at me. She grabbed his face and turned it, forcing him to look into her eyes. Bell. Rayurga. Bell roared in frustration. He wanted to calm down, a tiny part of him knew she was right, he had to stop. But the bloodlust burned within him and try as he might, he just couldn't calm down. He tried to struggle out of her grip, but Aiz was still stronger than him, she held him firm. Aiz closed her eyes for a second before she made her decision. She knew what she was about to do carried a certain risk. Bell was so enraged right now, she didn't know how he would react, she could only hope it would calm him down. She reached her hand up and stroked his cheek. Bell's head snapped around and he stared at her for a few seconds. She saw his eyes change, but didn't know what it meant exactly. It was still difficult sometimes to understand the expression on Bell's face when he was in his rabbit form. But she had his full attention now, he wasn't looking around for more victims, he wasn't sniffing around for more blood, he was staring deep into her eyes. Aiz. He said quietly, much to her relief. He wasn't shouting, his growl had stopped, he had stopped struggling to escape her arms. She relaxed the grip and watched him for a moment, he seemed deep in thought. Ah. She called out in surprise. Bell had grabbed her under her knees and picked her up princess style. He glanced around for a few seconds before crouching, coiling his legs up and then leapt straight on top of one of the few remaining walls of the castle. Leaping again, Bell Crannel and Aiz Wallenstein vanished from the magic mirrors as he carried her off into the distance. Ibri and Ganesha stood stunned as they watched the final moments of the wargame. They had both gone silent the moment Bell had descended into his rabbit rage, the vision was too horrific to commentate on. All they could do was stand and watch. Ibri said after a moment as Bell and Aiz vanished. I guess that means that Hestia Familia are the winners. He said with a somber voice. There was silence over the city for a few moments. No one knew what to say. It didn't last though, suddenly there was uproar. Please. All of you calm down. Ina called out to the hordes of people who had stormed the guild with various demands about what to do about Bell Crannel. He has to be executed. Someone shouted, there's no way he can be allowed to live in this city. He's a monster. Shouted another. We all have children, you know. What happens if he loses it at the next full moon? Exile or execution, I don't care which, but he has to go. Ina couldn't handle it. This was too much. Having just witnessed just how brutal her Bell could be, she understood every concern that was being shouted at her. But she also knew Bell, knew how sweet and kind he could be. Knew that even in his rabbit form, as long as he wasn't exposed to blood, he was perfectly calm and never a threat. After the initial shock of seeing him for the first time, she had never been scared of him. But it was too much for her, she ran from the counter. She couldn't listen to the crowd anymore, she had to get out of there. Is everyone here? Arenas asked as the last few minor gods filed into his throne room. Yeah, they're all here. Loki called out. Let's get on with this. Arenas cleared his throat. Now you have all arrived, we can begin. The question is, what do we do about Bell Crannel? Hestia looked at her feet. Orario was clamoring for her child's execution. She very much doubted anything she said about how nice and kind and gentle Bell was would have any effect. She would fight for him, she loved him after all. But she knew how fickle the gods could be, she knew how scared the city was of her child. She had few hopes and had mentally resigned herself to be cast out of the city along with Bell as the best-case scenario. Bell began to stir as he awoke from his rampage. No one was stroking his hair, which he thought was odd. He was also rather uncomfortable. For some reason, everything was prickly where he was lying. It reminded him of his journey to Rio, when he slept in a haystack in a barn one night. The straw was soft to lie in, but oh so prickly on his skin. Oddly, one half of him felt rather warm. He opened his eyes to see a wooden ceiling. He frowned for a moment, he didn't recognize it. Blinking a few times as his mind became fully awake, he looked down at himself. To find he was stark naked. Not only that, Aiz was sleeping with her head on his chest, she was naked as well and curled up around him. He panicked for a moment, but decided not to move. He didn't know how he got here. He didn't know why he was naked, and he really didn't know why Aiz was sleeping on him, naked as well. He sighed at his confusion. "I don't remember a thing," he said out loud to himself. "That's a shame." He heard Aiz answer, he hadn't realized that she was awake. "Aiz? What happened? Why are we naked?" "Well, you rampaged after getting shot in the ear with an arrow." "Oh," he said. He didn't remember a thing, he thought for a moment. "Yes, I remember the arrow, but that's the last thing I can recall." "What happened?" "You." Aiz knew she had to tell him the truth. "You killed a lot of people, Bell." Exclamation point. His breath caught in his throat. "How many?" he asked, dreadfully scared of what Aiz's answer might be. "I'm not sure. As soon as I saw you get hit, I ran to come and calm you down." "What happened?" "Well, you blew up the castle with your Argonaut, then you killed Hyacinthos." Bell didn't know what to say. "I got there a moment afterwards and tried to calm you down, but nothing was working, you just kept struggling to get out of my arms, you wanted to keep killing them." "Oh gods. I'm sorry, Aiz. I did get you calm though, eventually." "What did you do?" "I stoked your cheek." She giggled for a second. "You picked me up like a princess and leapt over the castle wall and carried me here." "Oh." He thought for a moment. "Did we?" He trailed off, there could only be one reason they were both naked right now. "Yes," she replied quietly with a smile. "I didn't. I didn't force you, did I?" He was suddenly dreadfully afraid that he had done something horrible to Aiz. "No." "Well, kinda." "What?" he asked in horror. She smiled at him though. "When we got here, you were very gentle, just nuzzling me over and over. You didn't force me to do anything." She stopped for a second. "Until I kissed you. Then you kinda didn't hold back." "I?" He didn't know what to say. "Don't worry, Belle. I kissed you because I wanted to, after that. Well, it just kinda happened." "I don't remember a thing," he said with a sigh. "Then let me show you what you missed." She replied with a smile and brought her lips up to his. Many hours later, Bell and Aiz finally arrived back in Rio. Ganesha, Shakti and around 20 high-level Ganesha Familia members were waiting for the pair at the main gate in the city walls. "Bell Cranel," Shakti said, walking up to him. "There is a matter to discuss at the guild. Please come with us." "Am I being arrested?" Bell asked in shock. "No," Shakti replied. "But if you don't come with us, he'll have to arrest you. Please come voluntarily." Arenas cleared his throat. "Now you have all arrived, we can begin. The question is, what do we do about Belcramel?" Arenas's chamber erupted with noise as all the gods shouted at once. Utter chaos reigned as all the gods tried to express themselves at the same time. Various shouts echoed through his chamber. Many were calling for Bel's execution, others just prison or exile. Hestia stared at her feet in despair. Hephaestus gently put her hand on her shoulder to reassure her friend, despite being quite aware that this meeting might well end with her expulsion from the city or worse, her return to Tenkai. All of Hestia's friends surrounded her at that moment, Takumi Kazuchi, Mayak, Demeter, and then to her surprise, Loki joined her side, and then to her utter shock, Freya walked over with a smile and stood with the group as well. Fed up with the shouting, Auranas roared. Silence! His voice boomed across the chamber. May I remind you all, that despite what we have witnessed in the wargame, Belcranel has committed no crime. Uproar began again. The gods' indignation would not be tempered by the fact that Bell hadn't technically committed a crime. In the eyes of many of them and the majority of the population of the city, Bell was a mass murderer, and everyone had witnessed it live as it happened. Auranas lost his temper and snapped his fingers, using a small amount of arcanum to place an artificial silence across the chamber. No matter how loud they shouted, the gods' voices were silent. Hestia! The old god called out gently. Do you have anything to say about this situation? Bell's a good boy. Hestia screamed out in desperation. He's never hurt anyone since he arrived in the city. He has been through 4 moon cycles now, and each time he behaved himself, no one was hurt. No one was killed, and he certainly didn't go on any rampages. Her confidence built as she spoke. He's smart too. One of the first things he did when he arrived is ask the Mayak Familia to make a mask to block his sense of smell, so that even if he did get exposed to blood in his rabbit form, he would not lose control of himself. Is that true? Auranas asked, looking at Mayak. It is, my lord. Mayak said with a bow. Understood. Auranas replied, before looking back at Hestia, implying she should continue. He's a good boy. She repeated again, speaking more quietly and with less desperation in her voice. He only wants to be a hero, to save people. He's not a killer at heart, he's a kind and gentle soul. He really is. He surprises me as a child, that he is so kind and gentle when life has been so horrible to him. Her voice cracked for a moment. He had nothing before he met me. No familia wanted him. He never knew his parents. She glanced very briefly at Freya. She tried to make it as subtle as possible, but Auranas noticed and slightly raised an eyebrow. He was abandoned by the person who raised him. Technically not a lie, Hestia thought to herself. Bell had been abandoned in a way by Zeus when his change had occurred. Life has been cruel to him, but he still smiles on regardless. It's not his fault that some stupid god challenged him, us, to a wargame. As you said, he has not committed a crime. Death is an expected, if undesired fact of a wargame. He does not deserve to be punished, nor does he deserve exile either. Bell has done nothing wrong, he has committed no offense in this city, and he certainly does not deserve your judgment. She looked up, staring into Auranas' eyes with some defiance. Don't we base our system on innocent until proven guilty? Do we execute innocents because we fear them? Do we exile them because of potential harm? It could happen with any high-level adventurer, particularly those with the berserk skill, right? I mean, what if? She glanced at Loki for a moment. No offense, Loki, but what if one of your Amazons got into a bar fight and went berserk? Or Finn? He has that skill too. She looked towards Freya now. Or even Otter. What might he do if someone harmed his goddess and it sent him into a rage? Many adventurers have the power to destroy the city on their own, but we don't cast them out due to fear. My Bell deserves to be treated the same as the rest of them. If he commits a crime, then he should be punished. But he has not, and knowing my Bell, he won't. He's not a threat to anyone. Well, anyone who isn't stupid enough to grab a war-rabbit's ears. She glared at Apollo. Despite Hestia winning the wargame, dealing with Bell had to come first before the consequences of Hestia's win. Auranas stared at Hestia for a moment as she stopped speaking. You are correct, Hestia. Bell does deserve the same treatment as any other adventurer. But that perhaps puts him in more danger. Many are very frightened of him. If he remains in the city, there is a good chance. Auranes shook his head. No, considering the fear the city has, he will be attacked and killed by someone, and if he is attacked, especially during his rabbit phase, the consequences could be dire for the city. Hestia hung her head. Auranes was right. There was nothing more she could say in defense of Bell. To Hestia's surprise, Loki raised her hand to speak. Auranes briefly raised his hand and lifted the artificial silence from Loki. Well? Loki scratched the back of her head and opened her eyes a little, forming small slits as she gazed at the elder god. Much as I hate to defend Chibi here, there are two things on my mind. Hestia looked up at Loki in shock. Loki was going to defend her? Why? Hestia racked her brain, but the only thing she could come up with was Aiz and. Yes, the pair were obviously in love, but Loki hated that as much as she did. They both wished that the pair had never met. The first is we need to look at the rabbit as an asset to the city. We already know that Rakia is on the march and will be here in a month or two. Loki cracked a massive grin. The trickster goddess couldn't help herself. Why not give them a surprise? Seeing that kid in action, he could take on the whole army and not just beat them up and send them home like we do. He'd slaughter all of them. It would send them a message: don't fuck with Ororio, we have a were-rabbit. Auranes hummed to himself. An interesting idea. As much as I would like to avoid any bloodshed, Rakia and its constant invasion attempts harm this city a great deal. I would also like to avoid the difficulties they bring. Auranes was thinking back to the last few wars with Rakia. They always cost the city dearly. As the city was besieged, food supplies would run low and people would starve. All trade was cut off, condemning the city's economy. If Rakia and especially Ares be harmed enough, they would certainly think twice about attacking again. Loki's idea had a lot of merit. And your other thought? Auranes asked. Well, he's been good for my Aiz, she said after a quiet moment. Loki really didn't want to admit this, but the point Hestia had made about adventurers early was very true. She has a skill that is rather dangerous. I don't want to reveal it, but... She paused for a moment, trying to choose her words carefully. In the right circumstance, she has the potential to destroy the city. And Bell has been good for her. She's happy because of him. I don't want her to lose that. Hestia looked at Loki in shock. She didn't know how to feel about that. That, and we all saw it. She glanced around at the silenced gods. She can control him when he's like that. She's stronger than him. We all saw her restrain him, calm him down. She's good for him too. I'd suggest that, when the full moon is out, Aiz escorts him. That would help keep the city and the civilians happy. Hestia was even more shocked now. Loki was offering her help? She didn't know what to say. Freya raised her hand now, wanting to speak. Speak, Freya. He waved his hand and lifted the silence from the goddess of beauty and war. I would like to offer my familia's protection for Bell, she said with her usual smile. What? Hestia screamed at the top of her voice in utter shock. Freya turned to Hestia and looked her in the eye. Hestia was even more surprised when she saw Freya's tearful expression. She had never seen the goddess look sad before. Freya was always in control of herself, that slight confident smile she wore all the time never wavered. She was always composed in public. Hestia was beyond confused at this point. Loki had helped and now Freya was looking at her with tears in her eyes. Hestia. I recently learned that I did something many years ago that has deeply hurt Bell. You know, Hestia said quietly, covering her mouth with her hand in shock. You know why he hates you. Freya nodded sadly. I cannot undo what I did. But I can do everything I can to make it up to him. I would like to offer you my familia's protection for him. Hestia frowned. She didn't understand. Why did Freya care about Bell at all? Why? What is my Bell to you? He was my otter. Freya said with a sad smile. Was? Hestia was even more confused. Freya wiped the growing tears from her eyes and gave Hestia a brief ironic smile. He was so beautiful. His soul was like none other, absolutely pure, transparent but shining with a light that seemed to come from heaven itself. How could I not love him? How could he not be the soulmate I have searched so long for? She gave a bitter sigh. But, when he learned of what I had done, I tainted him. His hatred for me roars in his very soul now, a black flame. A tainted black flame of my doing. She held back a sob. What did you do, Freya? Arenas asked. Freya looked down, ashamed of herself. Hestia, however, stared straight at her. She had his parents, who were part of Zeus' familia, executed when they tried to return to Orio. She said coldly. That is a grave shame. Arenas said quietly, feeling deeply for the poor boy. Does anyone else have anything to say in defense of Belcranel? Arenas asked the room. Takamikazuchi, Mayak and Hephaestus all raised their hands. Arenas waved at the three of them, allowing them to speak. Takamikazuchi spoke first. Belcranel has shown himself to be an honorable young man. Despite my familia past parading him and his party, he showed us no ill will. He became our friend instead and his familia our allies. Takamikazuchi bowed as he finished speaking. Mayak spoke next. Bell and his familia have become good friends of my own. He is a kind and considerate young man. Mayak bowed in turn as Takamikazuchi had done. Hephaestus was the last to speak. He is a remarkable young man. He managed to give my wealth something he never found in my familia. A family. I have been watching them grow, both my wealth and Bell since they met, and I couldn't find such upstanding young gentlemen anywhere else in the world. Bell is a young man to be respected, not punished. Understood and managed perhaps, but certainly not punished. Arenas nodded and then waved his hand, rendering silence upon the room again. I'll come with you, Shakti. Bell replied to the Ganesha Familia captain as he looked nervously at the Ganesha guards that surrounded him. Aiz gave his hand a gentle squeeze to reassure him. He responded with a brief but nervous smile. Am I in trouble? I don't know the specifics, Bell. Shakti said with a shake of her head. How much do you remember? Bell shook his head. It always took a few days for the memories to return after a rampage. Well, the whole city saw you, Bell. Honestly, many of them are very scared. The moment you won, the guild was overwhelmed by people wanting either your execution or exile from the city. The gods are current discussing what to do, but nothing has been decided yet. Bell didn't know what to say, but there was something he did want to know. How many? How many people did you kill? Bell nodded, his eyes downcast. 34. Bell gasped in horror at himself and hung his head in shame. I'm a murderer. It's not your fault, Bell. Aiz pulled him closer as she tried to reassure him again. They brought the fight to you and knew the risk they were taking, Bell. But Aiz's words didn't help. Bell had killed again, something he'd been trying to avoid ever since he arrived at the city. He couldn't help but feel that every effort he had taken to keep himself under control had been a waste. The city knew what he was now and his potential. Bell bit his fist in frustration and despair. Shakti looked at him with sympathy. She didn't know Bell very well except by reputation, but standing before her at this moment was a young man who obviously regretted his actions and carried an overwhelming guilt. He certainly didn't seem like the murderous rabbit she had witnessed through the magic mirror. Come, Bell. The sooner we get you to the guild the better, she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Bell nodded without looking at her, his eyes still downcast with regret. The Ganesha Familia members moved to surround him as they walked down the main street. This served two purposes. to make it look like they had Bell under control and that, even though he was currently in his human form, they were there to protect the public from him. But also to protect Bell from the public themselves. As soon as he had stepped foot in the city, people had begun to stare at him and whisper. As they traveled down the main street, many members of the public began to follow them. It didn't take long for the shouts to begin. "Murderer!" Someone shouted and threw a rock at his head. Bell was a level 2 adventurer though, so he easily dodged it. He may have dodged the blow to his head, but he certainly didn't dodge the blow to his heart that came with it. He knew now, this was how the city saw him. Not as a young man or adventurer, but a threat to them and their very existence. He hung his head in shame as he walked. "Who threw that?" Aiz shouted at the top of her voice, very angry that someone had dared to attack her precious rabbit. Her hand flew to the sword at her side, ready to take on anyone that threatened her rabbit. "Easy now," Shakti said as she grabbed Aiz's arm. "If another person attacks Bellcrannel, they will be arrested," she shouted at the top of her voice, glaring at the crowd. Shakti's job was to keep the peace. She would not tolerate people attacking someone in her care. The Ganesha guards closed ranks around him, to protect him from the growing crowd that were following them. However, Rio was a big place. It was at least a 20-minute walk from the gate to the guild, so Bell had to suffer the taunts and jeers from the crowd as he walked. Soon tears began to fall down his face, both from the regret of his actions but mostly due to the fear and hate of the crowd. Bell had never been hated in his life and the whole city had turned against him. Each taunt or jeer was like a dagger to his heart. By the time they reached the guild, he was a very depressed young man. Aiz didn't know what to do, what to say. She just held him close, letting him know that no matter what people said about him, he still had her by his side. Every now and then he would jump a little as a particularly nasty insult or call for his execution was heard. She would squeeze his hand every time, just to let him know she was there for him. As they entered the guild, Ina saw him as he passed through the door. Her heart broke in an instant. Bell looked terrible. She had never seen him down like this before. Even during the weeks after he learned how his parents died, he'd been mourning and was obviously upset. He had never looked this depressed. She reached out her hand, wanting to call out and lift his spirits, but he was immediately led to the back of the guild and towards Aurena's chamber. She didn't get a chance. A few moments later he entered the chamber of the sky god. "Bell Kun!" Hestia shouted as she ran to him and grabbed him in a hug. "Kame-sama," he whispered, trying to hold back the tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry." "It's okay, Bell," she said gently, reaching up to stroke his cheek. "Everything's going to be fine. I promise." But it was all too much for Bell. The stress, the hatred of the city and his own self-loathing finally broke him. He dropped to his knees and began crying like a child into Hestia's bosom. Hestia stroked his hair and whispered reassuring nothings into his ear. That everything was alright, everything was fine and he had done nothing wrong. Once Aurenas had made his decision about what to do with Bell, the majority of the gods had left the chamber. Only Loki and Freya remained, both looking down at the crying young man with sympathy. Aurenas sat and patiently waited for the young man to calm down. After a good 10 minutes of venting his feelings into Hestia's chest, he had finally stopped sobbing and Aurenas spoke. "Bellcrannel." Bell pulled himself from Hestia's chest and looked up at the old god, wiping the tears from his eyes. "Why yes?" he asked nervously, wondering how the god would condemn him. "After much debate I have come to a decision. As several gods pointed out, you have committed no crime and will not be executed nor exiled from the city. However, before I explain how we will deal with the situation, I would insist you watch what happened and understand your actions." Bell nodded slightly. I understand. Then observe," Aurenas said as he waved his hand, opening a magic mirror in the center of the room. Bell, still on his knees on the floor, watched as he saw himself on the bridge of the castle. He winced slightly and reached for his own ear as he saw the arrow strike his rabbit self. But then his rampage had begun. His jaw dropped as he saw just how brutally he ripped the throat out of the archer who had shot him. He gasped in shame as he watched himself drink down the blood of his victim, horrified that he showed so much pleasure. Bile rose in his throat as he disemboweled the next one with a slash from his clawed feet. He silently thanked Welf as he saw him guide him into the castle away from the majority of Apollo Familia. He gave a sigh of relief as he saw himself recognize Cassandra and leap over the girl without hurting her. He watched in despair as he killed again and again, terrified at his own blood-soaked image. He understood already just how brutal he could be when bloodlust descended in his rabbit form. He remembered exactly what he had done to the bandits after all. But seeing himself in action was very different from remembering. He was horrified at himself. Finally, he turned away as he saw himself kill Apollo's captain. Now he was ashamed. He hadn't simply killed the man. He realized as he watched that he had enjoyed killing him, enjoyed the fountain of blood that rained down on his rabbit face. Finally, the horror of what he watched was too much. He collapsed on all fours and threw up onto the floor, sickened at his own brutality. "I'm a monster," he gasped out. Hestia grabbed him in a hug again. "Bell," she said quietly. She wanted to reassure him, tell him he wasn't a monster. But she couldn't. Now that he had witnessed himself, what was there to say? "Bell, please, you were only defending yourself." But Bell shook his head. No, I wasn't. I enjoyed it, everyone can see that. The whole city saw that." He clutched at his head in despair. I should leave the city. I'm too much of a risk." He slowly began to stand up. Find a place in the mountains, away from people." "I can't." Both Aiz and Hestia grabbed him at the same moment. "You're not leaving me, Bell," they both said. "You are a valuable asset to this city, Bell Cranel." Arenas spoke. "As such, I would ask you to stay and continue being an adventurer." "But," Bell began to say as he looked up at the sky god once again. "For the next few months, you will be escorted around the city by Ganesha Familia. 4 members will live at your home at all times. This is both to reassure the population that you are under control and to protect you from those that wish your death or expulsion. During the full moon you will have a choice: voluntary incarceration or escort by high-level adventurers. Aiz Wallenstein." Aiz looked up at the god on the throne. "Yes?" "We saw how you calmed Bell in his bloodlust state." Aiz went bright red at this statement, knowing full well exactly why she could calm Bell in that state. "As such, we would ask you to be Bell Cranel's escort during full moon." Aiz gave a happy smile. "I'd be happy to, Lord Arenas. Freya has also volunteered her champion, Otter, to escort you as well." "WW what?" Bell asked in utter shock. Freya stepped forward and bowed to Bell, surprising him. He had been so wrapped up in his own emotions, breaking down when he saw his goddess, then the despair and self-loathing that had overwhelmed him as he watched himself murder 34 people, that he hadn't even noticed she was in the room. He looked at the bowing goddess, utterly confused, his hatred for her forgotten for a moment. She stood and began to speak. "Bell Kuwan." She reached out her hand and stroked his cheek. A single tear rolled down her face as she smiled gently at him. She wanted to apologize, to explain it all to him, but her voice caught in her throat and all she could do was smile sadly at him. Knowing her very presence would bring him pain, she whispered, "I'm sorry," just loud enough for him to hear, before turning away and leaving the chamber and an utterly confused Bell. "What was that about?" he asked out loud as he watched Freya depart. "I'll explain later," Hestia said. "Now come, Bell. It's time to go home. To our new home." "New home? What do you mean, Hestia?" he asked, now even more confused than ever. "Well, you did win the wargame, Bell. Apollo's Familia has been disbanded and we now own all their assets, including the mansion they owned. It will need some renovation, but we have a proper home for the familia now. Wow, Bell said as he stared up at the newly renamed Hearth Mansion. This is really ours? Yes, Bell. Lily, Wealth, and Makoto are already inside sorting things out. It's full of statues of Apollo. Utterly appalling for now. But don't worry. I have arranged for Goibnia Familia to do some remodeling for us. We even have an Eastern-style bath being fitted. Knowing how much Makoto loves hot springs after we found one in the dungeon, I thought it would be the best reward for her. Bell thought to himself for a moment as he stared at the mansion that was his new home. What happened to Apollo? He asked deep in thought. Oh. Hestia replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. He was expelled from Orario. He was thrown out of the East Gate with those of his familia that stayed loyal to him. It wasn't very many, most like Daphne and Cassandra decided to find new familias. Bell thought again, his hand on his chin. He'd made Apollo a promise and intended to keep it. Well, you go inside. I'm going to walk Aiz home, he said, giving Hestia a head pat. Hestia couldn't stand it anymore though. She knew the pair had gotten closer, it was quite obvious looking at them. Holding hands all the time, the subtle glances at each other. The fact she had managed to calm him down after his rampage in the castle. They had been gone for a couple of days afterwards. Hestia could only speculate what had occurred between them. Just how close are you and Wallen Watson exactly, Bell? She asked with an angry look. Both teenagers glanced at each other and went bright red. Bell looked down for a moment, slightly ashamed. He wasn't ashamed of his relationship with Aiz, but he knew how Hestia felt about him. She had made it rather obvious over the last few months and he really didn't want to upset her. However, there was no point denying it. He loved Aiz from the bottom of his heart. We love each other, Kami-sama, he admitted. Well, I knew that, Hestia exclaimed. But you're different from before. Closer than you were. Both of them now went an even deeper shade of red, but stared lovingly into each other's eyes. A look of utter horror appeared on Hestia's face as she began to realize exactly how Aiz had managed to calm the enraged rabbit. You have done that, haven't you? She said quietly, looking up at the pair. Bell, still staring Aiz in the eyes, just nodded gently while she smiled back at him. Hestia wanted to explode with rage, but looking up at her rabbit, she couldn't do it. Bell didn't deserve her ire after the day he had just had. It was bad enough that even now, as they stood in front of their newly acquired mansion, surrounded by Ganesha Familia members, that she could see people staring at him with hatred. Much as she wanted to berate him, scold him, she couldn't do it. Bell had suffered enough. With a resigned sigh, she turned and walked into the mansion. You can stay, if you'd like, Aiz whispered into his ear as they stood in front of the Twilight Manor, Bell embracing her to say goodbye. I would like that. But I have something I need to do, he whispered back into her ear. She pulled back and gave him a serious look. Apollo, she said quietly. Yes. I did make him a promise after all, Bell said with a grim smile. I can help if you'd like, Aiz offered. Bell shook his head though. No, Aiz. I don't want you to. This isn't hunting monsters in the dungeon. You're not a... He paused for a second. You're not someone who kills others. Not like me. Bell. You're not. She tried to say, but he quickly silenced her. I am Aiz. I accept it now. I understand what I am. Who I am. Even now. I feel it burning inside of me. They hunted me, Aiz. I won't feel better until... He trailed off. He didn't want to say that he wouldn't feel better until he killed all those who had hunted him. I'm coming with you, she said with some determination. If you're successful, once you're done you will pass out with a mind down. Won't you? Bell nodded, she was right. Then you will need me to protect you. Bell sighed. She was right, he either wouldn't come, as shown during the wargame, or once all were dead and no threats remained he would pass out and be rather vulnerable. Despite monsters on the surface not really being a threat, he didn't need to wake up to a half-chewed leg due to a wandering monster. What he was doing was risky and he knew it. All right. The Ganesha Familia guards had escorted them to the east gate as Bell requested of them. Bell was a free man after all, he could leave the city whenever he pleased. He explained to the guards that he would be back in a few days and to expect his return. Once the pair had passed through the gate, Bell changed into his rabbit form and sniffed the air. Quickly catching the Apollo Familia's scent on the wind, he smiled. The war-rabbit went hunting.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.